Hello everybody, this is the Vikstrand. The mechanics of comedy. It is basically tragedy plus timing, especially when it comes to more physical comedy. Otherwise, it could be summed up as the following: setup, execution, and payoff. If you do that, you will get some kind of reaction from it, probably a laughter or two. Now, this movie that we're going to take a look at today, Class Reunion, which is, by the way, completely devoid of such a thing as class. The movie is also completely devoid of anything that has to do with comedy. This is one of the single worst comedies I have ever seen. By far one of the top 5 worst comedies of the entire 1980s. And boy howdy, there are a lot of those. And because this movie, it has none of the timing in the misery. It barely even has any misery. The movie also fails completely with most of the setups, nearly all of the execution, and I don't think there was a single good payoff in this entire cavalcade of hell. So let's find out what the fuck is this movie all about. This is Class Reunion. The Lizzie Borden High School class of 72 is having a reunion. By the way, Lizzie Borden High School, salty anybody? Could you use some? Just a little bit? No? Okay then. So the hot girls and the geeks and the drug users and the blind girl and the vampire, wait, what was the last one? Never mind about that. Has come to, relive memories, eat terrible food, and dance and listen to Chuck Berry. Actually, the only thing about this movie that is actually good. Chuck Berry's special appearance is the only thing about this movie that I would label special. The rest of the movie is kind of crap, but we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, because just when you think that the hijinks is going to ensue, and just as you think as the awkward comedy is going to show up, then there is a weird guy with a bag on his head that has come to kick ass and chew bubblegum, and he's all out of bubblegum. Thank you, they live. Anyway, so they can't get out of the school and he's going to kill everybody. Because 10 years ago they played a horrible prank on him, and now he has come back for some vengeance. So the comedy sort of turns into a little bit of a parody of a slasher movie. Now, this was made in 1982, when the slasher movies had kind of not yet, become a major cultural staples of, Hollywood's thing. But it is still kind of a thing that goes on for a while. This movie goes off the rails almost immediately. As I said in my intro about, the mechanics of comedies, this movie fails on every level you could possibly fail on, because you're having slapstick humor without the timing. You're having comedy setups basically without payoffs and without executions. You have some weird, weak, setups for good jokes, but they never follow through on, or they follow completely flat. This is due to a number of reasons. One of them is that this movie is terribly written, terribly directed, and terribly shot, and terribly acted. Now, I'm not an expert on early 80s, comedies or stuff like that, but I didn't recognize a single person in this movie. I've seen a lot of early 80s movies. I haven't seen that many, of the National Lampoon's movies, but I recognize 0 people in this movie, not a single soul. Chuck Berry was the only thing I recognized, and that is just because of, his name. If you would have, lined up a bunch of people and they told me, pick out Chuck Berry, I wouldn't even know who to begin with. But that is beside the point. John Hughes, who is probably the most overrated filmmaker of, the entire 20th century, seriously, he's so beloved, and I've never seen a single thing he has either written or directed that I think is really, really good. Some of it is decent, but most of it is really underwhelming in my opinion. It is terribly directed, and Nothing ever got a laugh out of me. There were a couple of occasions where, you know, they had a line here, a line there, a, you know, setup for a joke that I almost felt, hey, this could actually be kind of funny. But it wasn't. It looked very low rent, it looked very low brow, but it didn't go anywhere. It just was one of these movies where nothing really happens. You won't believe how little actually happens in this movie, but the setup promises you that a lot of things is going to happen. And it is not raunchy and it is not gratuitous enough for it to be, you know, shocking or anything like that. They play this rather safe actually. And if you just would have thrown in a couple of really offensive jokes that at least would have woken me up, I probably could have said, ugh, that was a terrible joke. Ugh. But they didn't. It was just boring. And they followed this one up with an almost magnificently boring and flat ending. It was flatter than 4 o'clock. It was flatter than a plate full of piss. And we were left with a very underwhelming comedy that was terribly unfunny. I don't know what to say apart from, you know, don't see this movie because it fucking sucks. It kind of reminds me of, you know, the mid-2000s terrible spoof movies like Meet the Spartans or Date Movie or Dance Flick, or the really terrible ones like Disaster Movie and Epic Movie. Now, the movies I just mentioned, no, they're so terrible that I actively hate it and it makes me angry, but at least it gets a reaction out of me. This movie is just nothing. It is so nothing that I don't recall almost a single joke. I just saw this movie yesterday. One of the key reasons why this movie really doesn't work is the fact that we have no characters to latch on to. I mean, you have a girl that can breathe fire and speaks with a man's voice or something like that, and you have a vampire, and still they do nothing with them, you know, except stupid things. And you have, you know, the John Candy ripoff, the Wish version of John Candy that shows up and checks under the skirts of girls and stuff like that. But he's just so annoying that I wanted him dead. In fact, I wanted the entire cast murdered by the guy that put on the prank on. Jesus Christ, this movie was fucking terrible. And as a side note, and this is a rather personal note for me, when you're having these, you know, high school comedies and high school dramas and stuff like that, and movies with, you know, about teenagers, the vast majority of the actors and actresses in those movies are, you know, in their mid to late 20s. I even know that there's a couple of movies where people in their mid 30s have played teenagers. That is freaking bonkers. And I thought, well, at least then you can have people in their late 20s, you know, both for the flashback sequence and present day, aka 1982 settings. No, no, no. I don't know if it is the style of hair, or it is the makeup, or if the fact is that they've actually hired people in their late 30s, mid 40s in some cases. They looked old, you know, for supposedly being people in their late 20s. It was a small thing, but it was really distracting. In the end, this movie sucks, and sucks big time, for a variety of reasons. It is just a barely stitched on, you know, cavalcade of skits and sketches that goes nowhere and achieves nothing. And it even failed the task of being a decent parody of a slasher movie. Jesus Christ. One of the worst comedies I've ever seen in my entire life. I'm giving this movie 4 points. Terrible acted, terribly written, woefully executed. It just looks cheap and low rent and boring. If it at least could have had some memorable, really stupid moments to wake me up from this comatose state I was in when I watched this movie, but it couldn't even manage to do that. This was fucking dreadful. So I'll see you next time from, well, so-and-so reviewing, well, such and such. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much.